last week. Had a lot of technical issues with this live stream, but I think we're up and running now. This is the deep dive on Zeus, Hades, and Orphic theology, and the seeming monotheism that seemed to start to be present about 500 to 600 years before we see it come to real prevalence around the time of the Common Era and the centuries that would follow. It's an interesting piece. The video on Hades spoke a lot about Zeus and Hades being one or flip sides of the same coin. And so in this video, this live stream, what I want to do is get into some of the metaphysics of this, the theology behind it, bring you straight to the textual sources so that you can see what it is that I'm talking about with better clarity. So Hades is one of those things that we tend to think about in a modern cultural perspective. When we think about Hades, what we tend to think about is this guy right over here in the left-hand corner. Classic Disney approach to Hades. The Greek devil bad guy, the Lord of Hell, right? But we also get, say, Clash of the Titans, the classic rendition by Ralph Fiennes, wonderful actor. And if you haven't seen The Return, which is about Odysseus and the Odyssey, you're into the Greek stuff, really good flick. I would check it out. Beyond those two classics, which depict him as this devilry bad guy juxtaposed against Zeus, we also get things that's more a little bit more modern than even those, right? We have like the god of war, Hades, this kind of like just sub bad guy who I guess Kratos fights in the game. I haven't played them, so I don't really know too much about how they've twisted the lore to their narrative. But we also see Hades show up as this romantic lover, this romantic guy with Persephone. He's kidnapped her, but then like there's this kind of Stockholm syndrome thing going on, and we see this in a lot of online communities who are interested in the whole Hades Persephone dynamic, and we will be touching on that. However, what we've seen up to this point in the modern age about Hades is as this ultra distinguished polar character to the Olympian Zeus, someone who is somewhat an adversary of Zeus. Some would say the Greek devil, if you will. And what we're hoping to do today is dispel that. So this modern understanding of Hades has evolved significantly in recent decades. What we kind of have seen through this Christian interpretation, with new scholarship, new texts coming out, we are examining new evidence and seeing that this overlap in archaeological finds and these new texts coming out show us a completely different version of what we're used to seeing here in the Western world. And I think that's something that we're going to continue to see as people keep translating and coming up with new texts, as we get to them. There's a whole host of texts that still haven't been touched. So in the world of the future and of AI translations, I'm sure we're going to get a lot of new stuff here in the next few years. But let's look at this traditional view and some of the popular misconceptions. One of them comes from Homer, and this is a traditional Greek perspective that comes directly from the Iliad, and we'll touch on the text as well, but it depicts the cosmos as divided into three distinct realms. In a way, the heavens ruled by Zeus, the seas ruled by Poseidon, and the underworld is ruled by Hades. And this comes directly from the Iliad, and is, in fact, the perspective of Poseidon that says it. But we've also got this Hades as the Grim Reaper, the grim ruler of the dead. Not necessarily the guy who causes death, but the one who lords over the dead. This kind of dark, brooding figure portrayed as a stern or gloomy deity who passively reigns over the souls of the departed underworld. Now, in some myths, of course, he's a little bit more grim. Like, you get in there, if you go down into the underworld, we see this with a lot of our heroes. When you go down into the underworld, there's no coming back up without a price. Like, you have to pay a specific price to do that. And then we see Zeus and Hades as rivals in some things. And this is mainly modern misconceptions. This is not something that we see in the old myths. They're not really at odds. There's some inclination that Hades is afraid of Zeus, is somewhat scared of Zeus. but that's in passing. That's like one line in one text, and so it's a little bit misleading. So we're going to look at it today through an Orphic perspective, an Orphic lens, and we're going to dig into the evidence of the great Rhapsodic hymn. We're going to look into some of the Orphic hymns themselves about Zeus and Pluton, who, if you followed the video that I released last week, the Greeks didn't even call Hades Hades. Hades was the name for the underworld realm in which Pluton governed. And so we're going to look at these hymns. We're going to look at a couple other texts like the Dionysiaca and others. So the role of Hades or Pluton in the mystery cults is absolutely transformative. It is something that we have to pay attention to. These religious societies were very much interested in transformation through death and understanding what that transformation was like. So when we think of these mystery cults, particularly something like, say, Eleusis, that's the one that grabs everybody's attention. But the Bacchic cults, the Orphic circles, all the different mystery religions at that time in late antiquity and before, in the classical and Hellenic eras, were interested in what is this transformation that we undergo in dying. What is it that is happening? Glad to see you guys. Thanks Vart. Thanks Sky. I hope you guys can hear me better. I checked it before. We're in the middle of this thing. I'm just gonna keep moving. These secret religious societies were instrumental in maintaining and propagating sophisticated theological perspectives that viewed both of these deities, Zeus and Hades, as two aspects of a singular divine force. And that's what we're going to find as we move through so much of the Orphic corpus on this channel and over on my Substack. When we do this kind of work, what we're seeing is that there's this... Kristen Mathis says it really well on her Substack, and I absolutely think you should go check her stuff out. Brilliant philologist, classical translator who's translating the Orphic hymns. She calls it fractal animism. And what we mean by that is that there is one kind of field of being, and through certain movements, through certain actions, it reveals in a different way. And we tend to be part of that fractalization as well. And so this transition of death is one of those moments where things shift and change for us. So the people who were engaging in these mystery cults were very fixated on the moment of death, preparing the body and the mind and the soul for the moment of death, for this radical transformation to occur. So what are the implications for Greek religion? Now, we tend to view the Greek religion, the state religion, as polytheistic, right? And I think that part of the problem that we have with this view is juxtaposing it against monotheism, right? It is the antithesis of monotheism. If monotheism is one god and only one god, then polytheism is all the gods, and these have to be counters to each other. They have to be different or polar opposites. And this is the same thing that we're experiencing here with this whole Zeus-Hades dynamic that modern perspectives have brought us to. But this perspective that we're going to be touching on today challenges that traditional Hesiodic division of the realms and provides more of a holistic understanding of the Greek pantheon, the aspects of divinity that shine forth in these different guises. Okay? Let's continue and talk about Pluton, because that's what the video was about, was starting out as Hades. But as I got into the research, as I got into a little bit more, and this is something I've known for a while within my own practice, but it wasn't something that really came up for me much. A lot of my underworld journeys, my underworld practice has been under a more Egyptian framework, and so I haven't spent a ton of time with catabasis in a Greek perspective. Now, when I went to start looking at this, we look at Pluton and Hades, and there's basically nothing when it comes to the extant textual sources on Hades, on Pluton. The Greeks didn't like talking about this. They didn't like talking about the underworld, about death necessarily. We have a lot of their material that does talk about it. You know, you have all the underworld journeys, all these underworld trips by the heroes, but they wouldn't even mention the name other than Pluton. And Plato observes this in his Cratylus, page 403, observes that people preferred calling him Pluton, the giver of wealth, right? So there's this earth, this chthonic connection with the dread name of Hades, or Hades, as they called it. And he says, hence we find that in ordinary life and in the mysteries, the name Pluton became generally established, while the poets preferred the ancient name Hades or the form Pluteus, which is also another distinct aspect of this earth deity. The etymology of Hades is uncertain, but some derive it from Aden, whence it would signify the god who makes invisible, and others from Hado or Hedo, so that Hades would mean the all-embracer or all-receiver, and the Roman poets used the name Dis, Orcus, and Tartarus as synonymous with Pluton for the god of the lower world. So it's a reference to death, but it's also a reference to manifestation, right? The giver of wealth. That doesn't say to me death god, dark, evil, brooding, underworld deity, right? Now, some of the other names, you know, Zeus, Chthonios, or Necron Soter. Necron Soter, you know, of course, meaning the savior of the dead. The savior of the dead, or Chthonic or underground Zeus, hence the title of this live stream. What we're seeing within these names is not the image we've been presented within the modern context of what is Hades. Now, for Pluton Extended, what we're going to talk about here is Orphic Hymn 18. And this is the translation from Taylor. I haven't gotten to a translation of this one yet, but I will be over on my Substack channel. So Taylor says, to Pluton, Hades, Pluton magnanimous, whose realms profound are fixed beneath the firm and solid ground in the Tartarian plains, remote from sight and wrapped forever in the depths of night. Zeus Chthonios, thy sacred ear incline, and please accept these sacred rites divine. Earth's keys to thee, illustrious king, belong, its secret gates unlocking deep and strong. 'Tis thine abundant annual fruits to bear, for needy mortals are thy constant care. To thee, great king, all sovereign earth assigned the seat of gods and basis of mankind. Thy throne is fixed in Hades' dismal plains, distant, unknown to the rest, where darkness reigns, where destitute of breath pale spectres dwell, in endless, dire, inexorable hell, and in the dread Acheron, whose depths obscure earth's stable roots eternally secure. Now, one of the things I find interesting here is Thomas Taylor, we're thinking, you know, this is somebody who's in the Victorian era. He's projecting it through a Christian lens. There's a lot of liberty in this translation, and I don't know if it necessarily speaks to what we're trying to accomplish here with our Orphic. They're good translations, but they are slightly dated. They're not, I guess, illuminated by the current scholarship, right? But we do start to see a clear picture of this underworld deity. But in the names, again, it's always in the names that we need to look. The epithets. Zeus Chthonios, so Zeus in the underground. O mighty daimon, whose precision dread the future fates determines of the dead, with Demeter's girl Persephone captive through grassy plains, drawn in a four-yoked car with loosened reins, wrapped over the deep, impelled by love, you flew till Eleusinia's city rose to view. There in a wondrous cave obscure and deep, the sacred maid secure, from search you keep the cave of Athos, whose wide gates display an entrance to the kingdom's void of day. Of works unseen and seen, thy power alone to be the great dispending source is known. All-ruling, holy God, with glory bright, these sacred poets and their hymns delight. Propitious to the mystic's work incline, rejoice, come, for holy rites are thine. So okay, so the second half of the hymn, the first half that I read to you there is very much the picture of this dark, gloomy underworld deity. But then it flips, right? Almighty Daimon. This is the Agathos, the good Daimon. So there was this perspective that death was, of course, a good thing. We don't want it, right? We want to be alive, but the happening of it brought forth something of a transformation, something of a welcoming into this realm of Zeus Chthonios. Call it a transition, if you will. But the end of it here, of works unseen and seen. So there's this idea of hidden and visible. Now, Zeus being the visible aspect, the typical Zeus that we think of, and the unseen is Pluton, who had the cap of invisibility, as we will find in the Orphic Rhapsodic Theogonies in a little bit. But there's this unseen element of Zeus. And that's what the Orphic perspective is that Pluton is this unseen, underground version, the Necron Soter of Zeus. Excuse me. We're going to switch gears to the Orphic Rhapsodic Theogonies, and this is what so much of my content has, at least up to now on this channel, been based on, is these rebuilt or reconstructed fragments of an old Orphic poem that was on par or at least contemporary with Hesiod and potentially older. Now, for the Orphics, Orpheus is the theologian, right? Hesiod, Homer, inspired poets, but beyond that, and for most of ancient Greece, Orpheus is the dude, right? So, these theogonies, they present a picture of the generation of the gods, but also the generation of the cosmos itself. So what we're looking at is not just a story that displays the genealogy of the gods as much as Hesiod does. This is complex metaphysical building of the cosmos. So we've talked about Rhea, we've talked about Kronos. Well, they produce glorious children. Hestia, Hera, as well as Pluton and Poseidon. Okay, so now we know there's a lot more of these first Olympians, right? This is discounting Demeter. This is discounting Zeus as well, right? We know there were 6. So the Orphics take a little bit of a different turn here. We've got 4. Hestia, Hera, Pluton, Poseidon. The order is important. But Kronos has also been given an oracle that his rule would be usurped by one of his children, so he swallowed them one by one as they came into the world, but Rhea despised this and contrived a plan. The next child came forth, glorious Zeus, and at the birth of Zeus, Rhea became the Earth Mother. So in that moment, this is really interesting, what we see is Demeter is born, and so is Zeus. So there's your 6. There's your 6 of those original, right? So Rhea becomes and changes into almost manifesting in a lower or more condensed layer of reality, which is what the Olympians represent from that titanic force. So she deceives Kronos by presenting him with a rock around which she wrapped swaddling clothes. Kronos swallowed the rock, thinking it was his newborn son. This caused him to vomit up all of the titanic children. Pluton now took his seat on the earth, wielding the cap of invisibility. The Hades, and, my Greek is still too meager for me to tackle that live. The symbol of the power, the symbol of his power. So Poseidon took residence within the sea, wielding the trident. The other son of Kronos, too, was well destined for great things, but the time was not yet ripe. So here, we have a very different story of how they come about their seats of power. This is before the overthrow of the Titans. I want to touch on what we're looking at as far as a textual consideration of when these texts are coming out. So we have the earliest inscriptions that we can date back about Zeus, Chthonios, and other epithets of Hades. We've got some of that at Eleusis. We've got some of that elsewhere. But we're thinking, this is 6th century BCE, right? This is stuff that we can find, like the Derveni papyrus that backs some of this up. We have votives from Eleusis around 5th century. We have temple inscriptions in the 4th century. The Orphic hymns start to coalesce around the 3rd century in some of their form, but the versions that we have are probably dated towards, 2nd century of the Common Era. So we don't have versions of these things, of some of these texts, back to the 6th century. We do have some, but we don't have some of the versions that we are working with today. Whether or not they were extant 6th century or not, it's clear that through the ones that we do have, these concepts hold true. Hey, Jacob. Yes, it's astrotheology of the highest order. So we do have temple inscriptions at Eleusis. We have votive plaques of Pluton that carry the same symbolism of Zeus, the same scepters, the same kind of just your basic iconography that matches. Some of them accompanied by an eagle, which we know is a Zeus symbol. More often than not, though, when we think of Eleusis, people think of 3 particular deities: Demeter, Persephone, Hades, right? And that is a typical view of what's going on at Eleusis, but that's discounting a major, major element that we're hoping to uncover here today, and that is that Zeus and Dionysus, of course, are a central aspect of this. So I want to take a second to look at some of the epithets. So we have Zeus Chthonios, which the Orphic hymn refers to Zeus as Zeus Chthonios, and Pluton as that as well. The Zeus of the Underworld, right? So we have that. Polydegmon is one that they share. Pluton is one that is the aspect of Zeus, right, as this Hades. They both share some of these symbols, and we're going to see it in the hymns themselves. But I want to switch gears to this version. I think this is... Yes, so this is a shorter version. We will get to the longer version of the Orphic, the Great Rhapsodic hymn. This is one that we have quoted by Aristotle and by Porphyry. And so quoted by Aristotle, we're thinking about 322 BCE, so he's quoting it, which means it's potentially older. Could be by a few centuries. So in the Orphic tradition, we see Zeus as this all-powerful, all-encompassing deity who is the foundation of the entire cosmos, maybe even the web, the entire body of the cosmos itself. And it says, Zeus of the flashing bolt was the first to be born and the latest. Now, if we remember back to what we just read on the Orphic Rhapsodies, Pluton was the first male child to be born. Zeus is the head and the middle. Of Zeus were all things created. Zeus is the stay of the earth and the stay of the star-spangled heaven. So we see 3 levels here as well, the head, the middle, and the end. All 3 of those levels that were talked about within the Iliad. Zeus is male and of female sex, the bride everlasting. Zeus is the breath of all and the rush of unwearying fire. Zeus is the root of the sea and the sun and the moon in the heavens. Zeus is the flashing bolt, is the king and the ruler of all men, hiding them all away and again to the glad light of heaven, bringing them back at his will, performing terrible marvels. Now, in there you see a lot of Poseidon, you see a lot of Pluton, right? You see a lot of these 3 aspected elements of this all-encompassing deity, right? Zeus is the breath of all, the rush of unwearying fire. That is the Olympian heavenly Zeus. Zeus is the root of the sea. That is the Poseidon of the sun and the moon and the heavens, right? That's the order of the cosmos, right? The unwearying fire is that transcendent fire that exists before the cosmos is made. Then you have Zeus as the root of the sea. That's your Poseidon. That is the next level, the demiurge itself. Plethon is the one who gives us this here. And we will get to him. But Plethon basically dictates that Poseidon is the one who is the fashioner, the craftsman, the most perfect of Zeus's children. And then we have Zeus as the flashing bolt, the creation of mankind, right? This, I think, still is like a mix or maybe somewhat in between the realms of Poseidon and Hades. But then we have, of course, Hades and Pluton showing up here, hiding them all away and again to the glad light of heaven, bringing them back at his will. So there is right there the metempsychosis. They are going away under the earth, hiding them away, and again to the glad light of heaven. And so this idea of going into Hades, undergoing a purgation of some sort, and then being reborn again in the light, performing terrible marvels. One of the reasons they don't talk about Hades, they didn't want to talk about Hades or Pluton, is because of the sacredness of this transformation, the sacredness of the process of dying and coming back. You don't profane those sorts of things. But what are we looking at here? So I've written a couple of pieces on this, and I do have some papers coming out about this particular hymn and what we are seeing metaphysically within the hymn. Now, we have the establishment of authority in the first 3 lines. We have temporal sovereignty, and I'm just going to go back here. Zeus is the flashing bolt, the first to be born and the last. So we have the boundaries of time, first and last, right? Alpha, Omega, if you can think that way, right? Creative power in line 2. Zeus is the head and the middle, the head, the seed of our consciousness. Of Zeus, all things were created, right? Then we have the cosmic foundation in line 3. Zeus is the stay of the earth and the stay of the star-spangled heavens. This refers directly to the foundation of the cosmos itself. Further on throughout this, the next 3 lines speak of the divine nature of this cosmic being. First, starting with gender, Zeus is male and female, the bride everlasting. So he is an androgyne. Now, this is mimicking, of course, Phanes, who is the first demiurge that we see within the Orphic Rhapsodies, which is really, really fantastic. It's really interesting that they kind of manifest themselves in the same way. We see the same abilities present in Zeus and Phanes, and we will get to why that is. In line 5, we have the energy manifestation. Zeus is the breath of all and the rush of unwearying fire. So this is speaking of the manifested fire that comes from Zeus. The elemental rule in line 6, Zeus is the root of the sea, the sun, the moon, and the heavens. So it's the elements, it's the spheres, it's the mechanics of the cosmos itself. And then in lines 7 through 9, we have the culmination of what Zeus is. The ultimate kingship in line 7 and the cosmic cycles in 8 and 9. So it positions him as the king of Olympus, but also dictates how the cycle of life is supposed to go. What is supposed to occur when Zeus takes hold of Olympus, so to speak. So in this, we have a monotheistic doctrine that is present at least 300 centuries, or 300 years, not centuries, 300 years before Christianity even breathes its first breath with the idea of Jesus. So, are we looking at polytheism here? Because it doesn't read like it, and it doesn't feel like it within the context of this kind of metaphysics. And this is hyper complex thinking that we tend to look back on and say, oh, well, they just had all these ideas, right? What we're looking at with the Orphics and with the fringe elements of Greek religion are extremely, extremely complex and extremely old ideas. So that's the first and shorter version of the Great Rhapsodic Hymn. This one that we're going to read now is a lot more complex. It's a lot deeper, and it tells us a little bit more about Zeus, the character of the cosmos, and what we're looking at. And why we can look at things like Hades and say that is not necessarily a distinct, separate deity. It is, but it isn't, right? There's a beautiful paradox in this. Zeus is the first and the last, the Lord of lightning. Zeus is the head and center, for all things are from Zeus. Zeus is born male. Immortal Zeus comes forth a nymphi. So he's born male, but then comes forth, or is born into the cosmos as a female. Now, this is the influence of the Chaldean oracles. This is the influence of Neoplatonism here. This version, this Great Rhapsodic Hymn, I'm guessing has to be somewhere in the first 2 centuries of the Common Era, because this is Zeus as the paternal monad, and then Zeus coming forth as probably Hecate as the world soul, and we see this in the Chaldean oracles. But we'll continue. Zeus is the foundation of earth and starry heaven. Zeus is sovereign of all, for he is the first cause of all things. In one divine power, emerging one divinity, the commander of the world, one regal body in which everything revolves, fire and water and earth and ether and both day and night, Metis, the first begotten one, and lovely Eros, for these are all in the mighty body of Zeus. We continue. Behold his head and handsome countenance, the radiant sky. Around his golden hairline, his golden hair, are the gleaming stars twinkling beautiful. And there are great golden bull's horns on either sides of his head. The rising and setting sun, the heavenly pathway of the gods, his eyes are Helios, reflected in the moon. His mind is kingly truth itself, the immortal Aether, hearing and considering all. Nothing which is, no word, nor cry, nor noise, nor voice escapes the ear of this, the mightiest son of Cronos. Thus, indeed, his immortal head and mind, now then his radiant body, boundless, undisturbed, his fearless, strong limbs, exceedingly mighty, are formed thus, the shoulders and chest and broad back of the god, formed of the air all surrounding. He generates wings, whereupon he flies everywhere. His divine belly is the earth, the mother of all, and with her imposing hills and mountain peaks, the belt about his middle is the wave of the deep-voiced sea and ocean. His feet, the foundation of the earth, are dank Tartaros and earth's furthermost limits, hiding all things, yet causing them to newly emerge into delightful light. He brings them forth again from his heart, acting in divine wonderment. This is one of the most incredible hymns and piece of poetry from this period. This is so rich. You could write book after book of, as we said here with Jacob here, astrotheology and metaphysics of this late antiquity, this late antique period, just from this poem alone. There's so much within here. We have the setup of who Zeus is in one level of reality within the first few stanzas, the first few lines. Then we have a little bit more about what he might be from a demiurgic perspective. How does he create the cosmos, right? This first piece, as we reflect back, is this transcendent Zeus, this paternal monad. The second aspect is more of the logos, is more of the second intellect, as the Chaldean oracles would say. And then finally, the third part is that Hades element, the Pluton, that speaks to us of what occurs in manifested reality when spirit does manifest within matter, or hyla, as they say. So how does Zeus get to this point? That's what I want to move to next. How do we get to Zeus being an all-encompassing being when in the Orphic Rhapsodic theogonies we have all these various deities? We have Kronos, we have Rhea, we have the Titans, we have Uranus and Gaia. How is it that Zeus maintains this ability upon taking the throne from Kronos? How does he get to be the entire body of the cosmos? Now, this is different than what you're going to see in Hesiod. This Orphic act of swallowing is a very, very intriguing metaphysical thing to ponder. So they say, they bound the god, and Zeus castrated him, just as Kronos had previously castrated his own father. Hesiod doesn't have that. And then Zeus went to the sacred cave and asked Mother Supreme of all the gods, immortal Nyx, how am I to proceed? How can I inaugurate my rule with the immortal gods? How can I keep all things as one and yet separate? And blessed Nyx, gleaming with the blue of dawn, answered him, saying, surround everything in the Aether, the heavens, the earth, the sea, and the stars, and bind them all with the golden ethereal chain. Thus mighty Zeus engulfed and swallowed Erechipaios, Phanes, employing all of his power, and drew everything that existed into the hollow of his belly. So in this, we have the moment in which Zeus swallows the entire cosmos or swallows the power of the generation or the emanation of all things. And for this brief moment, in this brief moment, as all things rested within the being of Zeus, and now all things in Zeus were created anew. The sky, the sea, the earth, and all the blessed and immortal gods and goddesses, all that was then and all that will be, all mingled within the belly of Zeus. So from this, Zeus goes on to, essentially within the Theogonies, recreate the cosmos. He recreates everything. And some of the major points of creation along the lines of the male element, the male polarity here, are Zeus as the head, Poseidon as the middle, Pluton as the feet, and then eventually Zagreus or Dionysus as the, let's say, the child of, or the essentially the archetype of humankind, of divine made mortal, and then from mortal to immortal. Which is why we're going to switch now to the laws of one George Gemistus Plethon. He was a Greek scholar and one of the most renowned philosophers of the late Byzantine era. He was a chief pioneer in the revival of Greek scholarship in the West. So we're looking 1300, 1360 was when he was born in Constantinople, right? So he is in the thick of it. He's in the thick of Christendom, and he basically gets ramrodded by a Christian scholar called Scholarius, which is hilarious. A Christian scholar named Scholarius who was obsessed with burning books. In fact, all that we have left of Plethon's work is fragments that were kept by Scholarius as proof of his decadence and his love of paganism. So we don't even have all of the laws. We don't have all of the writings from Plethon and what Plethon was putting together in this time or carrying forth from this time. But what we do have is what's funny is the most incriminating parts. So we don't have a lot of the juicy details that would be nice to have if we're looking at reconstructing things today. But what we do have is the juiciest details, the most incriminating details of Plethon's system that speak directly against what the Christians might have cared most about at that time. But essentially what Plethon's getting at here is that he posited that Zeus directly produces what he calls the super-celestial gods, divided into the Olympians and the Titans. So Zeus produces these other gods in a sense similar to the number 1 and how it produces 2, 3, and so on. Yes, always fragments. Always fragments. So Poseidon then is the first emanation of Zeus. He's the eldest and the most venerable. He is generated from Zeus alone and is thus motherless. He calls Poseidon form itself, or autoeidos. He is not a particular form, but contains within him all forms. So it's almost like in that moment, Zeus is all things, but had to recreate himself in a more condensed form. So we see that condensing of forms in the Orphic, Rhapsodic Theogonies. We see them basically from Phanes to Nyx, Nyx to Uranus and Gaia. We see more multiplicity in each level of generation. Well, Zeus has to perform essentially the same action upon taking power. So he produces himself first as the generator, the demiurge, the fashioner, and within such contains all forms. And Plethon's Laws, Book 1, Chapter 5, Verse 3 says, "The other gods are divided according to divine nature into the second and third orders, children of Zeus and then his grandchildren. These are the instruments by which the King Zeus governs all things, and especially human affairs. Each is set over a greater or lesser part of the universe, but all are governed by great Poseidon, the eldest and the most powerful of all Zeus's children, the most beautiful of all of his creations, and the most perfect." So yes, Poseidon is literally water, Vart. Like, that's absolutely correct. And the basis of what we're dealing with. Now, the Orphic Rhapsodies talk about water and earth as the primary elements, that mixture of mud, harkens back to Poseidon. Just think about ourselves, right? Mostly water. The earth is mostly water. Water, water, water. Poseidon is the demiurge. Poseidon is this creator. Now, in this slide here, I've got a picture on the right. You probably can't see it all that well with the setup that I have. But it's got Zeus and then Poseidon and Hera as a duality that generate further Apollo, Artemis, Hephaestus as a further fashioner of a lower octave of reality with Dionysus and Athena, and then Atlas, and then further down we have everything all the way down to Cora or Persephone. Like these levels of order that the Neoplatonists and then later thinkers like Plethon thought about are hyper complex, and we see them also within the Orphic theogonies as well. So what does he say about Pluto, about Hades? He posited that Pluto emanates the immortal human mind, or the nous, the lowest of the immortal beings. Pluto is essentially the idea of the immortal human soul. He thusly cares for souls between incarnations. So, reflecting on Plato, discussing the old Orphic idea of the soma sema, that the body is a tomb, we can derive that what is thought from later Orphic perspectives is that when we are incarnated, we are under the care of the lower world orders, such as Pluto and Cora. And as we see in the image here, Plethon, in his super celestial gods, has Cora and Pluto as some of those lower orders of reality. In fact, Pluto, right before the emanation of Rhea, and Rhea and Cora basically encapsulate the world in which we inhabit. So I want to take a second. We're going to spin off into what happens in the Orphic theogonies after Zeus creates, himself. What he does is he goes through a series of divine marriages and creates the basic principles of order that exist within the cosmos. In these divine marriage patterns, we see the re-unfoldment of the cosmos. This act of swallowing destroys, in some way, everything that came before. Everything that we've been covering on the channel with the Rhapsodic theogonies is just whisked away in this moment of swallowing, and then he seeks to remake it anew. Now, there is something really interesting about this, and it reflects on the idea of Hades and of transformation through death anyways. The death of the cosmos itself is this transcendent act that purges the cosmos itself, just like death purges the soul of impurities, right? Of things that accretions, right? That cling to us as part of the generation of matter. Now, there's several authors who talk about the existence of humans and ages of humanity before this moment. But what we see in this moment of Zeus consuming all things and remaking them anew is a purgation of the sin that we talked about within Ouranos and Kronos. It's Zeus, essentially, from my perspective, and this is, I think, only mine. I don't think anybody else has talked about this yet. It seems as though Zeus is trying to correct the universe. There's a very Thanos element to it, like, let me do it myself, I will fix it. But there is a purgative transformation that occurs here. And so he recreates the most important aspects of the universe again. From Themis to Cora, we see a series of divine marriages that produce, in effect, the nature of the world itself, of the cosmos. From Themis, he bears first the seasons and divine order itself. He then marries Dione, who technically is like himself, in a way. It's just the female version of himself, and he bears Aphrodite. So he bears love first. So seasons, so cycles, and the cosmic structure or boundary of everything, and then he fills it next with love. Then he turns to Hera, who bears him Hephaestus, the artificer, Ares, of course, the passionate warrior, Hebe, the cupbearer, and Iliotheia, the liminal guardian, or the guardian of childbirth, of birthing souls, who is kind of, you've got some mixture there with Artemis, but also with Hecate, so there's a lunar element. Then he mates with Leto and bears the sun and the moon, or the Artemis and Apollo. and then through Maia bears Hermes. From his swallowing of Metis, Athena is then born from his head, which, of course, this is this weird element of Zeus being both male and female and mother and father of various deities, like Athena and Dionysus. And from Cora, he bears Zagreus. Zagreus, who is then murdered by the Titans, and then basically implanted within Semele, who bears Dionysus version 1, who is basically burned up when Semele is killed from seeing the transcendent fire of Zeus, and then he has implanted Dionysus into the right thigh of Zeus, and from that he is carried to term to what I call Dionysus 2.0. Goes through like 3 iterations of himself before he is made manifest. So we see this first generation, what Zeus is up to. Through Themis, he births the seasons, he births justice, good order, and peace. And from those, from his copulation here, also the charities, splendor, merriment, and abundance. So he's recreating the fabric and divine order of the cosmos first. Then, of course, once you have that divine fabric, you fill it with longing, with love, with Aphrodite herself. So one of the things I always like is that how relegated in most Greek religion, especially in the modern perspective from neo-pagans, is, yes, Dionysus the thrice-born. Although more often than not, he's considered twice-born because of the epithet. But these deities like Dionysus, Aphrodite are often relegated to like footnotes, right? Because you think about the Olympian 12, it's always Ares and Hera and all these great stories that are part of the kind of exoteric tradition, but esoterically nothing could be more important than Aphrodite and Eros and Dionysus for these cults. So let's transition here. We've seen Zeus kind of taking these divine marriages and creating things. Well, what is one of the most famous of the divine marriages, of the divine consorts, if you will? And that is the abduction of Persephone by Hades. This is one of the most lauded and spoken about myths of the old time, of this entire time. Excuse me. For this, we're going to go to a Homeric hymn number 2 from Demeter, and it reads, Demeter's trim-ankled daughter, whom Adoneus rapt away, given to him by all-seeing Zeus the loud thunderer, apart from Demeter, the lady of the golden sword and glorious fruits, she was playing with the deep-bosomed daughters of Oceanus, and gathering flowers over a soft meadow, roses and crocuses and beautiful violets, irises also and hyacinths, and the narcissus which Gaia the earth made to grow at the will of Zeus, and to please Polydector, the host of many. To be a snare for the bloom-like girl, a marvelous, radiant flower. What's really, really interesting here is, okay, so she's out here picking flowers. Well, who's going to be the king of flowers in the future? Zagreus, Dionysus. So it's almost like this. He's luring her in with these symbols of what their union will produce. It was a thing of awe, whether for the deathless gods or for mortal men to see. From its root grew 100 blooms, and it smelled most sweetly, so that all the wide heaven of Uranos above and the whole earth Gaia and the seas salt swell laughed for joy. And the girl was amazed and reached out with both hands to take the lovely toy. But the wide-pathed earth yawned there in the plain of Nyssa, and the lord Polydegmon, the host of many, Hades, with his immortal horses, sprang out upon her, the son of Kronos, Polynomos, he who has many names. He who has many names. Now, if we're reading this just literally, we're going to be like, okay, of course, it was Hades. That's the dude who abducted her. But we follow the epithets. We follow the other text. We go a little bit deeper, and we see this is the seduction and the abduction. Seduction and then following abduction of Cora, of Persephone, who is, of course, the daughter of Demeter and Zeus. Now, we've already seen that Zeus mates with Rhea, who is his mother. He then mates with his sister, Demeter. He then mates again with the product of that union, there is some strange aim here. He keeps having to meet in coitus, in union with the Mother of Earth. And so whatever variant that comes in, he is inexorably drawn to and must mate with. And there is some aim that is occurring in this mating. So we continue. He caught her up, reluctant, on his golden car, and bare her away, lamenting. Then she cried out shrilly with her voice, calling upon her father Zeus, the son of Cronos, who is most high and excellent. But no one, either of the deathless gods or mortal men, heard her voice, nor yet the olive trees bearing rich fruit. Only tender-hearted Hecate, brightly coiffed, the daughter of Perseus, heard the girl from her cave, and the Lord Helios, Hyperion's bright son, as she cried to her father, the son of Cronos. But he was sitting aloof, apart from the gods, in his temple where many pray, and received sweet offerings from mortal men. So he, Hades, that son of Greus, Polynomos of many names, Polysamanter, ruler of many, and Polydegmon, host of many, was bearing her away, by leave of Zeus, on his immortal chariot, his brother's child, and all unwilling. And so long as she, the goddess, yet beheld earth and starry heaven, and the strong flowing sea, where fishes shoal in the rays of the sun, and still hoped to see her dear mother, and the tribes of the eternal gods, so long hope clammed her great heart for all her trouble. And the heights of the mountains and the depths of the sea ran with her immortal voice, and her queenly mother heard her. This is very much Homer, right? And one of the reasons why Plato didn't like poets, because this is heavily encoded, and it makes the gods, these transcendent forces, feel human, right? And Plato very much disliked that. But what we see in here, there's a great deal of Orpheus, right? And yet beheld earth and starry heaven. That's very Orphic. This idea of a unified being of Zeus, essentially abducting his own daughter, is very much in line with what we've been exploring as this divine unity expressing as multiplicity. And so what we see is something very different, but also encoded in some way with the same. So this Persephone connection is really interesting because it's one of the primary pieces in which we get Hades. It's where we get the idea, the modern idea of Hades, including that kind of romanticized one that we were dealing with here. But in this, in most cases, Persephone was more important. Persephone, Demeter, they were more important elements of the story, and Hades always takes a back seat. So, let's look at it from the Orphic perspective. So there's a crucial connection here between Zeus and the underworld powers. And this comes from the Orphic Rhapsodic Theogonies. It says, "Mighty cloud-gathering Zeus, with deep foreknowledge, understood that he must marry his mother Demeter, she who designed the works of the droning bees." That's an Apollonian connection there to the Oracle of Delphi, and that is the realm of Rhea, right? But Demeter resisted his advances and transformed herself into a serpent. That's hearkening back to Kronos and Ananke, the serpents at the beginning of the world who cracked the cosmic egg. Zeus responded by becoming a serpent himself, and the two intertwined in the knot of Heracles, producing the daughter of Persephone. Now, the knot of Heracles is really interesting because one of the shared epithets of Kronos, time, is Heracles. So this is a reference of like multiplicity and unity right there. It is the explosion of multiplicity from unity and then kind of its collapse back into itself, almost as if we're talking about a fractal nature of reality. When adequate time had passed and life-giving Persephone was at the bloom of her youth, referencing those flowers from the Homeric hymn, Zeus again became a serpent, united with her, and produced the child, Zagreus, the sweet child of his father. Now, this is what the Orphics were all about. For modern Orphism and what Orphism academically has been talked about, Dionysus is the key myth. This Zagreus myth is the key myth. There's a really good book called The Birth of the Gods by Dwayne Meisner. It's a little bit on the high end of the price point. It's about $100, but it basically posits that, yes, Dionysus is key in these mysteries. However, it really has kind of always just been about Zeus. It's always been about Zeus. And so we're going to fast forward from the Theogonies, and we're taking it all the way to Nonnus of Panopolis in his epic, the basic last grand epic poem of antiquity. And this is the Epic of Dionysus. It's really, really beautiful. Highly suggest you pick it up if you're interested in this kind of stuff. There's a good version out that just came out that is all 48 books of it. It's really thick. It's about that thick. And it's each chapter is done by the translation is done by somebody different. So you get a lot of different flavors, but they kind of keep within the wheelhouse of what Nonnus was about. Semele was kept for a more brilliant union, for already Zeus ruling on high intended to make a new Dionysus grow up, a bull-shaped copy of the older Dionysus, since he thought, since he through with regret, with the ill-fated Zagreus. This was a son born to Zeus in the dragon bed of Persephone, the consort of the black-robed king of the Underworld. So, Zeus laying in the dragon bed with Persephone, the consort of the black-robed king of the Underworld. It's like he's there, but he's not there. It's this wonderfully beautiful paradox. When Zeus puts on a deceiving shape of many coils, as a gentle dragon twining around her in lovely curves, and ravished the maidenhood of unwedded Persephone, though she was hidden when all that dwelt in Olympus were bewitched by this one girl, rivals in love for the marriageable maid, and offered their dowers for an unsmirched bridal. So, Persephone is born from this union with him and Demeter, and all the gods of Olympus are essentially, they go nuts. And this is the copy of the Dionysiaca, that I'm talking about here. It's a group translation. You can find it on Amazon. So Persephone's born. She comes into the bloom of her youth. And in this bloom of her youth, all the lords of Olympus go nuts. Hermes had not yet gone to the bed of Pietho, of persuasion, and he offered his rod as a gift to adorn her chamber. Apollo produced his melodious harp as a marriage gift. Ares brought spear and cuirass for the wedding, and shield as a bride gift. Lemnian Hephaestus held out a curious necklace of many colors, newly made and breathing still of the furnace, the poor hobbler, for he had already, though unwillingly, rejected his former bride, Aphrodite. When he spied her rioting with Ares, he displayed her to the blessed and the woman thief who had robbed his bed, when by information from Plethon, from Apollo, he had entangled them in his spider's net, naked Ares with naked Aphrodite. And Father Zeus was much more bewitched by Persephone, when Zeus spied the virgin beauty of her shape. His eye ran ahead of him to guide all of the lows, and could not have enough of Persephone. In his heart storms of unsleeping passion raged without ceasing, and gradually a greater furnace of the Paphian was kindled from a small spark. The gaze of love-maddened Zeus was enslaved by the lovely breast of the goddess. So he's talking about how in this moment with his lust for Persephone, he was greater than he ever felt when looking upon Aphrodite herself. So this unbridled necessity to sleep with Persephone, to mingle with Persephone, comes upon him. Nonnus is known for his very erotic turns of phrase. So he continues, once she was amusing herself with a resplendent bronze plate which reflected her face like a judge of beauty, and she confirmed the image of her shape by this free, voiceless herald, testing the unreal form in the shadow of the mirror and smiling at the mimic likeness. Thus Persephone gazed in the self-graved portrait of her face, and beheld the self-impressed aspect of a false Persephone. Once in the scorching steam of thirsty heat, the girl would cease the looming toil labors of her shuttle at midday, to shun the tread of the parching season, and wipe the running sweat from her face. She loosed the modest bodice which held her breast so tight, and moistened her skin with a refreshing bath, floating in the cool running stream, and left behind her threads fixed on the loom of Pallas, the loom of wisdom of Pallas Athena. So she's so hot, like, and this is something that I think Zeus is like kind of instilling in her in this moment. I think there's also an interesting ring of the older Zagreus myth in how the Titans distracted him with toys, with shiny objects, in order to dismember him. But she could not escape the all-seeing eye of Zeus. He gazed at the whole body of Persephone uncovered in her bath. Not so wild his desire had been for the Cyprian, when craving, but not attaining, he scattered his seed on the ground and shot out of the hot foam of self-sown love, where in the fruitful land of horned Cyprus flourished the two-colored generation of wild creatures with horns. He, so mighty, the ruler of the universe, the chariot of heaven, bowed his neck to desire. For all his greatness, no thunderbolts, no lightnings helped him against Aphrodite in arms. He left the house of Hera, he refused the bed of Dione, he threw away the love of Deo, he fled from Themis, he deserted Leto, no charm was left for him, but only in union with Persephone. Dude couldn't help himself. There had to be a mating with Persephone, and what is later encoded in other myths is that it was his underworld aspect, not this transcendent fire Zeus. And there's got to be some reasons for that, maybe cultural, but there are metaphysical reasons as well. Zeus himself, as transcendent fire, can't mingle with the lower levels of order. The demiurge himself can't mingle with lower levels of order. So in order to create a logos, in order to create a mortal child that will be proven mortal through this process of death and apotheosis, which is talked about within Eleusis, within Bacchic circles, within Orphic circles, within the mystery cults themselves, he had to wed Persephone, the Maiden of Spring, with the deathless aspect of himself, the Death Lord, the Underworld, Zeus Chthonios. So this unity of Zeus and Hades is a central teaching within this initiatory complex. We find as we move through these hymns that these Orphic mysteries are essentially the display of unity in multiplicity and multiplicity in unity. These theological doctrines were preserved and passed down through secret ritual practices, and revelations are imparted upon one when reading through these or performing these hymns. So if you look at the Orphic hymns themselves, if you look at the Orphic corpus, if you sit down with the hymns and read one every day for 87 days, which is the length of the hymns, I can guarantee you something strange is going to happen to you. There is going to be some weird stuff that happens because they are literally meant to initiate you in such a way. Now, I'm sure they had rites that went with it, but simply reading them will do the trick as well, which is really interesting. It's fascinating stuff. So, what are we getting at throughout this entire thing? There is a monotheism, or what we can kind of picture as a monotheism, a unity and multiplicity that is happening here, that is creating a Zeus in matter, right? That is Zagreus, that is Dionysus. This Orphic figure of Zagreus, the offspring of Zeus and Persephone, is the key piece of this evidence, of the fact that they were mingling with these weird monotheistic, polytheistic ideas that we think were not available to them or they were not exploring. Trying to remember. So I built this slide deck about a week ago, and I'm like, where am I supposed to go with a lot of this? So the texts, oh man, what a horrible image they made here. This AI made this just terrible image of Demeter. But so Orphic theology, Zeus and Hades are seen as one and the same, but presenting as different. And this, I think, does mimic the agricultural cycle. And so does this idea of Demeter and Persephone. This deep connection between death and life, of higher realms of transcendence and fire, and the earth and water are evident. And we see these things played out in the Eleusis mysteries as well, in the Eleusinian mysteries. There is a moment within the initiatory process where the initiate comes to the realization that everything is one and that there is nothing to fear in this process of death. And that is what is reported from those within Eleusis and beyond. In all of these connections, whether it be Bacchic, Orphic, or Eleusinian, there is a moment of transformation that happens in life that prepares us for death, that prepares us in the same way that Zeus was prepared in the cave of Nyx, in the same way that Dionysus is prepared in the cave of Rhea, and eventually we, as initiates, will be prepared within the cave of whatever container we've created for ourselves in magical practice and or our ritual devotion. And I think since, as we see here, I have run out of slides, if there are any questions, if anybody has anything, I'm going to open it up. I'm going to grab a coffee real quick, and I'll be right back, and we'll do some Q&A on some of the stuff that we talked about. If you want to go back to any slide, just let me know. Ah, yes. More Go Fast brown water. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. I know last time it was a pain in the butt, but I think this is working pretty well. I sound good. The connection's stable. I think we may have found a solution to our streaming problems, guys. But yeah, so if you've got any questions on this, questions on Hades, questions on Zeus, on Orphic pseudo-monotheism and the texts we covered, rip them out at me. Come on. I'm going to go back to... Man, that Nonnus stuff is so good. I love the Nonnus material. For me, the most interesting piece is this strange moment of the swallowing. You don't see this in anything else, but the Orphic material is rife with this swallowing moment. In some cases, he swallows Phanes, but in other cases, he swallows the phallus of Uranos, and that's really, really fascinating. So Vart says, the devouring and the Ouroboros feel analogous. Also, the castration and how Horus came about from Isis and Osiris. Yeah, there is a certain succession through phallic dismemberment that does echo what we're talking about with Osiris. And of course, we have the echo of the vegetative god being killed and being reborn, or being reborn in a child form. So Osiris being, say, Chthonic Zeus or Hades, and then Horus being Dionysus, which very much fits, although many of the Greek writers associate Osiris and Dionysus as the same, as one and the same. But Horus is also seen not necessarily as distinct from Father, but as the fulfillment or culmination of the Father, right? And that's one of the things, like these genealogical representations that we see in Greek mysteries, in Egyptian mysteries, are really no different than what we see in a Logos tradition from the perspective of the Christians. These sons are the fulfillment of their fathers. And that's a message in antiquity that just doesn't ever quit. They are always the fulfillment of the Father. This final culmination of all things. But it never stops. As you see through these generations, they just keep culminating a newer version of the Son. And so even from Dionysus, we see the culmination happen within ourselves as well. That is the archetype, that is the mode that we're talking about here. Is Dionysus is the archetype for human experience, and what we are supposed to do is transmit the same things that you see from father to son, and then through that it's a culmination of divinity. I do think this idea of the cave is also really relevant because we see it happen again and again. And we talked about that in the Rhea video and in the Rhea live stream, this cave of Nyx where these kings go to be educated on the cosmic order or on prophecy just keeps popping up. It's just in different octaves or different condensations of reality. As these beings traverse downward into creation, they require a new kind of face, a new disguise, if you will. And so for Zeus to take matter on, to become embodied within matter, he had to bear a son. Vart says that fulfillment is so important, and what's bottlenecking our progress societal right now? We're seeing a specific generation devouring their children. Well, if that ain't the truth, I don't know what is. We do see it, and it speaks to the human experience. Generational infighting, right? You have people trying to devour either way, right? We see it in the reverse, too. Children, with their upheaval of previous generations, there's often a violent upheaval. But what these myths specifically, and what I think the Zeus aspect of it is yes, he violently upheaves the order of Kronos, but he seeks to fix it in his son. He knows there's something wrong within the cosmos, so he basically deletes the cosmos, remakes it anew, so that the appropriate king, the shining king, could do so. Now, in the myth, of course, the cosmos fights back. It's almost as though, even though he has created everything anew and he's trying everything again, the Titans still find Dionysus and try to supplant him in this. They wipe themselves with chalk, and then they come at him and they dismember him. But it depends. Sometimes it's Hermes, sometimes it's Athena. Rescue the heart of Zagreus, and then Zeus implants it within Semele, and so on. But there is this idea of succession and violent upheaval, but there's also the way to do it the right way. And what happens when that succession isn't allowed to be fulfilled? That's a big problem. We see that. Like, Ouranos doesn't do it the willingly way, and so he gets dismembered. He gets his phallus cut off by Kronos. And it's catastrophic, but at the same time, a necessary catastrophe, if that makes sense. So a lot of these violent upheavals create the opportunity for a lower level of reality, but a higher level of cosmic order to come about. So without the castration of Ouranos, you can't have the titanic matrix that is Rhea and the Titans and those more diverse forms of order come into being. So you almost have to have these necessary things in order for the multiplicity to continue. And there is a higher level of order to that as well. Unity, and this idea of unity being better than multiplicity isn't necessarily true. This swirling mass of undifferentiated perspective is chaotic as hell. It's just super chaotic, and there's just boundless potential, but there's nothing actually going on. There's no perspective. There's no way to relate, right? And so it seems as though, at least from the Orphic writers and those in antiquity, it was a necessary part or necessary action for relationship to occur, and relationship must occur in some way. The universe, the cosmos, wants to relate to itself, and it has to do that through multiplicity, right? We're in a really weird time, and have been for quite a while, where people are trying to get rid of that multiplicity in some way, or try to move away from it. And so it's a strange thing. There's a way for succession to occur properly and with divine order, and that is encoded within the stories and the myths. And then there's a way to do it more catastrophically and more dangerously. Any other questions? We can talk about anything, whether it's the swallowing or the hymns of Zeus or Hades and the Persephone connection. I've got time. If you want to talk about something else on the channel too, I'm open to it. since I kept you guys waiting for a week, since I had tech problems, you guys can just ask whatever questions you have. You guys ever get tired of clearing notifications? Because I do. It's obnoxious. I think if you haven't already, spending time with the great Rhapsodic hymn to Zeus is really powerful because it holds within it so much of the theological worldview of the last 2,000 years. And it's funny, when I read it the first time, not too long back, really, to be honest, I was like, this is Christian theology 600 years before Christ. And that just blew my doors off. I was like, how is this not being talked about? How are people not talking about this? Like, we have tons of channels talking about Dionysus and Jesus being the same. We have nobody talking about how 600 years before, in the Derveni Papyrus, we've got a monotheistic version of Zeus. Way before. All right, Vart. Yeah, do the 87 hymns for the next 87 days. You know, I have oh yeah. You talking about the Dionysiaca? The Nonnus? I've read it, and I've read the hymns as well. I have been thinking about doing a live reading of the hymns here, and then also potentially doing a more exclusive thing on Substack, kind of a course taking people through the hymns. So yeah, it's a good grab if you're into this kind of stuff. It really, because excuse me, because everything is so mired in this polytheistic viewpoint, in most of modern neo-paganism too, especially Greek stuff, the Dionysiaca is wonderful for trying to get an idea of what that kind of current feels like, because Nonnus really captures it. Not only is he a master of Homeric grammar, his form of his poetry is as close to Homer as you can get, but it's from a Dionysian perspective, and so it really captures a lot of the Orphic. So if you're into the Orphic thing, this whole Orphic thing that's exploding right now, definitely pick up Nonnus. It's beautiful. And what's really funny is if you get really into Nonnus, he actually does a paraphrase of the Book of John, which I've started to read parts of. I haven't really had the time to get into it too much, but he does basically his own Dionysian version of the Book of John from the Gospels. One regal body in which everything revolves. That's just amazing stuff. And this too, if you guys are interested in this first hymn, the shorter version that we get quoted from Aristotle in his De Mundo of the world, and Porphyry also does talk about it. Yes, Vart, as John, as in the Bible. Yes, the fourth gospel in the Bible. Nonnus does his own version of it in a much more beautifully poetic fashion. But it's definitely, you can see him saying in his own time, hey, you guys are talking about the old religion, but you're just putting your spin on it. It's kind of satirical in a way, but I think he also saw that what was going on was needing to be preserved in some way. It feels like it's his pushback against the recoding of the ancient mysteries in this kind of Judeo-Hellenic viewpoint. He's, I think, Nonnus is 5th century. I'm gonna check just to be sure, but so he's in the thick of it too. Like, that's when things start to change. Nonnus of Panopolis. Yeah, 5th century AD, and he is in the Imperial Roman era, but he was an Egyptian. So it's possible he was in Alexandria, I think. I think I remember that somewhere. So he was in the thick of all of this change up from the old religions to what was taking shape after the 3rd century when it became the imperial religion. He was writing these things probably quite dangerously. Not as dangerous as it would get for, say, somebody like Plethon, who ended up getting ostracized for it. But yeah. Any other questions? I'm here for, a few more minutes. Just chit chat, talk about whatever. This Poseidon connection, though, from Plethon is really interesting, too, because another deity who, through modern conception, we just relegate him to this kind of weird role of, like, King Triton. like, but he's so much more than that. Someone gave me a quote recently, John 3, verse 2, "Beloved, I pray that you may prosper in all things, be in health, just as your soul prospers." Prosper, Prosperina. You can see the connections there, right? I pray that you may prosper, may be a callback to Persephone in all things and be in health, Hygeia, just as your soul prospers. Now, who is the guardian of the soul in the old way of thinking? It's Hades and his consort Persephone, or Zeus Chthonios and Persephone, who guard the soul in the metempsychosis process. So as you die, you go through a purgation of period, and you, in some cases, this is like more of like a Pythagorean thing. You go to the essentially the dark side of the moon. The souls are led up through the Milky Way. So that band of the Milky Way in the sky, through that underworld journey, that is the road. And then on the other side of the moon is where the souls undergo further purgation, and it is decided whether or not the soul will ascend or descend again. Different versions, right? A lot of the metempsychosis of the West, there's no way to be reincarnated as a animal. Sometimes there is. I think some of the Pythagoreans thought that if you ate animals, you would become an animal. But that probably has more to do with their vegetarianism and what their beliefs were about that than it has to do with metaphysics. The belief was you'd go up and you'd come back down through various cycles of purgation until your body was a complete receptacle for the divine, in which case, in that process of being fully filled with the divine, you would reach some sort of apotheosis or deification, in which you could then become one of the heroes, which were the original saints, right? We think about saints now as these ascended beings filled with the light of Christ. Well, the heroes of the old age were very much that. Oh, yes. Yes, keep doing those paintings. Those were awesome. This is a really good book as well. I don't have it with me right now, but there is one by John Osasapos, or Opsipaus. Opsipaus. It's called The Secret Texts of Hellenic Polytheism, and that is the book that has Plethon's work and his essentially, 1300s, 1400s version of pagan polytheism that he was working on. There's a bunch of hymns to the gods in there. There's an entire calendar that you can follow and a bunch of rites that you can do. It's a great book if you're really interested in getting into this. I will put that in the notes after we kill the stream here. Actually, I think I have it right here. I just don't want to get at it. But that's another great buy if you're really interested in this. For more on the Rhapsodic Theogonies, HellenicGods.org is a really great resource. I've been writing a lot about this stuff over on Substack as well, so if you want to follow along with me there, I appreciate it. Yeah. Any more questions? I'm available. We're just in a Q&A period if you're joining us. We just went through the entire piece that I was meant to do last week. But if you guys have any more questions, I'm here. Well, if that's going to be it, guys, I'm going to let you go. Thank everybody for joining me. If you like this, give us a subscribe, drop a comment, drop a like. Check us out over on Substack. Love doing this stuff, guys. I've got more stuff coming out. I've got a piece on the Chaldean oracles coming out, a video. I'm trying to get it done, but this week has been kind of a crazy week. So was last week. So I'm trying to get that done and figure out what the heck we're going to be doing for the rest of this. Sound was perfect. I'm glad to hear it, Vart. Vartatula. Thank you for all your comments today. I appreciate it. Alrighty, guys. That's that for today.